It was late in the evening, the sun casting long, golden rays over the hills surrounding the Sea of Galilee. The sky, a magnificent palette of reds, oranges, and purples, seemed to stretch endlessly into the heavens. Jesus and his disciples had gathered atop a quiet hill, a place they often retreated to for prayer, reflection, and conversation. It had been a long day, filled with teaching, healing, and ministering to the crowds. Yet, despite the calmness of the setting sun, a feeling of restlessness had settled among the disciples. They sat in a circle around Jesus, the soft rustling of olive trees and the occasional chirp of crickets the only sounds interrupting the quiet. Over the past few weeks, tensions had been growing among the group. They had faced numerous challenges, both from the outside world and from within their own hearts. Disagreements had arisen, judgments had been cast, and doubts had surfaced. Peter, always the first to speak, could no longer hold back what had been troubling him. He shifted in his seat, looking toward Jesus, his eyes full of a mixture of confusion, frustration, and a deep longing for understanding. "Master," he began, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "We have followed you for so long, and yet I still struggle. I see the faults in others so easily. Why do their mistakes frustrate me so much? Why do I find it so difficult to understand my own heart?" The other disciples listened closely, their faces reflecting the same inner struggle. James and John, known as the sons of thunder because of their fiery tempers, had been bickering with one another earlier that day. Andrew, Peter's brother, sat with his head bowed, deep in thought. Thomas, whose doubts often set him apart from the others, gazed at the ground, lost in his own silent reflection. Even John, the beloved disciple, seemed unusually quiet, his heart weighed down by unspoken concerns. Jesus, who had been sitting quietly, gazing at the fading light of the day, turned his gentle eyes toward Peter. His face, always calm and serene, held an expression of deep understanding and love. He could see the turmoil in his disciples, their frustrations, their judgments, and their inability to find peace within themselves. He knew that their struggles with one another were not simply the result of external pressures, but stemmed from deeper, unresolved conflicts in their own hearts. With a soft smile, Jesus spoke. "Peter," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "your question is one that many have asked before you and many will ask after you. It is easy to see the faults in others, but far more difficult to recognize the cracks in our own souls. Let me tell you a story of a young man who struggled with the very same questions you now ask." The disciples leaned in closer, knowing that when Jesus told a story, it was not just a tale, it was a lesson, a mirror through which they could see themselves more clearly. In a small village nestled by the sea, there lived a young man named David. David was known throughout the village for his kindness and generosity. He helped his neighbors, gave freely to the poor, and was always the first to lend a hand when someone was in need. Outwardly, David seemed content and well-loved. But beneath this facade of goodness, David carried a heavy burden, an overwhelming sense of frustration and dissatisfaction with the people around him. Despite his outward kindness, David often found himself growing angry at the mistakes of others. When a neighbor forgot to return a borrowed tool, David would stew in silent resentment. When children played too loudly near his home, disturbing his peace, he would grumble to himself about their lack of respect. And when someone made a mistake that inconvenienced him, he would find it hard to forgive, convinced that they should have known better. David believed that if only the people around him would change, if only they were more considerate, more responsible, more like he imagined they should be, then his life would be peaceful. But as time went on, his frustration grew. He became more irritable, more impatient, and more distant from those he once cared for. One afternoon, while wandering through the bustling market, David saw an old, wise woman sitting by a well. She was known throughout the village for her wisdom, and people often came to her for advice. Her eyes, though aged, sparkled with the brightness of someone who saw deeply into the hearts of others. Desperate for answers, David approached her. "Wise one," he said, his voice filled with frustration, I am a good person, and yet I am constantly frustrated by the people around me. They make mistakes, they are careless, and they do not live up to my expectations. Why do I feel this way? Why can't they change? The old woman looked at David with a kind and knowing smile. She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a mirror. It was small but beautifully crafted, with a delicate golden frame. But as David looked at the mirror, he saw that its surface was cracked. The reflection it cast was fragmented and distorted. "Look into this mirror," the wise woman said, holding it out to him. "Tell me what you see." David took the mirror in his hands and gazed into it. His reflection was broken and unclear, the cracks distorting his face in strange and unsettling ways. "I see a broken image," David said, frowning. "The reflection is unclear. I cannot even recognize myself." The wise woman nodded, her eyes filled with gentle understanding. "This mirror," she explained, "is like your heart. When your heart is filled with anger, judgment, and frustration, it becomes like this cracked glass. You believe that it is the world around you that is broken, but in truth, it is your own reflection that is distorted." David stared at the mirror, her words sinking in slowly. He had never considered that his frustration with others might be a reflection of his own inner state. "But how do I fix this broken reflection?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. The wise woman smiled softly, her voice kind but firm. "You cannot fix the mirror by trying to change the people around you. The only way to mend this broken reflection is to look within. Reflect on your own heart, your own actions, your own faults. Only when you have healed the cracks inside yourself will the world begin to appear clearer." David felt a lump form in his throat. Her words touched something deep within him, a truth he had long avoided. He realized that his anger and frustration with others were, in part, a reflection of his dissatisfaction with himself. He had been so focused on the faults of those around him that he had never paused to examine his own heart. With a newfound sense of humility, David began a journey of self-reflection. Every day he spent time in quiet contemplation, examining his thoughts, his actions, and his feelings. He sought to understand the source of his anger, his impatience, and his judgments. And as he looked inward, he began to see his own flaws more clearly. He realized that he, too, made mistakes, that he was not perfect, and that the patience and understanding he longed for in others were qualities he needed to cultivate within himself. As the days turned into weeks, David felt a change begin to take root within him. The cracks in his heart, the anger, the judgment, the frustration began to heal. He found himself growing more patient, more forgiving, and more compassionate, not only toward others but also toward himself. He learned to accept his own imperfections, and in doing so he became more accepting of the imperfections of those around him. And as his heart healed, the world around him seemed to change. The flaws in others that had once angered him no longer seemed so glaring. The noise of the children playing no longer disturbed his peace. The mistakes of his neighbors no longer filled him with resentment. Instead, he found joy in their humanity as he had found joy in his own. When Jesus finished the story, a deep, profound silence filled the air. The disciples sat in stillness, absorbing the lesson. Peter, who had asked the question, felt a lump rise in his throat. The story of David had touched him deeply. He could see himself in David. The frustration, the impatience, the desire for others to change while ignoring his own flaws. Tears welled up in Peter's eyes, not from sorrow but from a sense of deep humility. He realized that his frustrations with others, his quick judgments, his impatience, were, in truth, a reflection of the cracks in his own heart. Jesus looked at his disciples, his eyes filled with love and understanding. He could see the emotions stirring within them, their struggles, their fears, and their desire to grow. "My dear friends," Jesus said, his voice gentle but filled with the weight of wisdom, "the world around you is a mirror reflecting the state of your own heart. When your heart is filled with love, compassion, and understanding, the world will reflect that back to you. But when your heart is clouded with anger, judgment, and frustration, the world will seem broken and flawed." He paused, letting his words settle into their hearts. If you wish to see the world clearly, you must first mend the cracks within your own soul. Self-reflection is the key to peace. It is not in judging others that you will find wisdom, but in looking inward and healing your own heart. The disciples listened in silence, their hearts swelling with emotion. They had spent so much time focused on the shortcomings of others, on the people they encountered, on their fellow disciples, that they had neglected to look inward. Jesus continued, his voice now filled with emotion. I do not ask for perfection from you. I ask for honesty. For it is in being honest with yourselves and acknowledging your flaws and seeking to mend them that you will grow. And in that growth, you will find the strength to love others more deeply. Tears flowed freely now from the disciples. John, the beloved disciple, wept quietly, moved by the depth of Jesus' love and the weight of his wisdom. James and Andrew, sitting side by side, exchanged a look of understanding, their hearts lightened by the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles. Even Thomas, who often doubted and questioned, felt a sense of clarity wash over him, a peace that he had not felt in a long time. Peter, still holding the weight of his question in his heart, wiped his eyes and looked up at Jesus. Master, he said, his voice trembling with gratitude, I see now. It is not the world that must change but my own heart. Thank you for showing me the way. Jesus smiled, his heart filled with love for his disciples. He knew that the journey of self-reflection was not easy. It required humility, honesty, and the willingness to confront one's own flaws. But he also knew that it was the path to true peace and joy. As the sun finally disappeared beneath the horizon, leaving behind a sky full of stars, the disciples felt an overwhelming sense of unity and peace. They sat together long into the night, sharing their thoughts, their fears, and their hopes. They knew that they were on a journey, not just of following their master but of growing together as individuals, healing their hearts, and learning to love more deeply. In the quiet of the night, under the vast expanse of the starry sky, the disciples felt a profound sense of joy, a joy that came not from perfection, but from the understanding that they were all on the path of self-reflection, healing, and growth. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.